Hey guys! Today I'm talking about the Gunlance. You may have noticed from the previous videos, but my favorite weapon in Monster Hunter is the Gunlance. It was actually the first weapon I ever played, way back in Freedom Unite, and I have loved it ever since. While the Gunlance is an incredibly fun weapon, it has always been a step behind compared to the other weapons, including Lance. However, in Rise that discrepancy between Gunlance and the other weapons feels a lot more pronounced for some reason, especially considering that the Rise version of Gunlance is the best it has ever been, even if you ignore Blast Dash and Guard Reload. So, today's video is about how Capcom could bridge that gap. I will say right off the bat that I'm not going to mess with motion values for regular Gunlance attacks, mostly just parameter changes and other things, since motion values are like a web, if you pull one string everything gets changed. I also don't think the problem with Gunlance has to do with its motion values, but I'll explain more about that later. In this video, I'm going to focus on three aspects of the Gunlance: shelling, the Wyrmstake, and Wyvern's fire. I think that changing some aspects of how these parts work will improve Gunlance and be more on balance with the other weapons. I also want to say that I'm not saying all the features I mentioned should be added. I am more or less just spitballing ideas for each of the categories. The first category I'm going to talk about is shelling, which is the most important aspect of Gunlance. Before I say anything else, I want to say that the number one thing that is said when improving the Gunlance is to remove the shelling level and make shelling scale with attack. However, I think that ultimately shelling scaling with attack is a bad thing for the Gunlance, and it would ultimately cause a lot more problems than it would solve. With all of the weapons in the game, there is normally at least one skill that the weapon needs. For example, Great Sword and Hammer need focus, or Switch Axe and Charge Blade need rapid morph. For Gunlance, you need artillery. If you make it so that shelling scales with attack, then you basically make it so that you need artillery and attack level 7. And if that happens, then you just make it harder for Gunlance to get the skills that make it more comfortable, like Guard and Evade Extender. Also, making shelling scale with attack just means that you lose the variety of endgame Gunlances you have, and it just ends up becoming one Gunlance is just better than all others. I know Rise Gunlance kind of has that now with the Rampage Gunlance, but because of how customizable it is, you still have that variety. Now that this is out of the way, let's talk about some improvements. The way Gunlance is designed in Stories 2 really shows that Gunlance is designed to do less damage than the other weapons. This is supplemented in Stories 2 with the Gunlance's ability to build kinship gauge incredibly fast. In the mainline games, while Gunlance does less damage overall, it has nothing to supplement it to bring it back up to the level the other weapons are at. In other words, Gunlance needs to find and fill a niche in Sunbreak, one that isn't overpowered and isn't incredibly focused on already. So, what niche could Gunlance fill? Elemental shelling. The way shelling works is that it is basically like having a bomb at the end of a lance. No matter where you hit on the monster, it does fixed raw damage and has a tiny amount of fire damage attached to it. An elemental shell could be a shell that, instead of doing a small amount of fire damage, does a hefty amount of elemental damage based on the weapon's element. For example, the Wrath Aloe's Gunlance would have a lot of fire elemental damage, or the Volstrax's Gunlance could have a lot of dragon elemental damage. I don't want to give exact values because that starts to get into motion values, but I think Gunlance would benefit from having a system where elemental damage plays a big role in the damage output. I could honestly see that as a switch skill for Gunlance. Another alternative for elemental shelling could be that it gives Gunlance the ability to inflict elemental blights in the monsters like a status ailment. There are only two problems that I see with this solution. The first one being that the list of skills Gunlance needs increases to add element attack, however that's easily solved by making the elemental shell damage fixed. The second and main problem is that this system would make it so that Gunlance players would have to be even more picky about the availability of Gunlances. Before, players would only have to worry about finding 1 to 3 Gunlances of different shelling types of a good shelling level. If this was implemented, players would have to find a Gunlance for each element and the 3 shelling types. The only solution I can think of to solve this problem is to make Elemental Gunlance a switch skill that you unlock at the end of the game. However, that solution in some ways defeats the purpose of adding this system to Gunlance in general. Ultimately, if an elemental shelling system was implemented, it would definitely need to be fine-tuned to address all the issues mentioned above. However, I can't think of another way to give Gunlance a niche to fill like how it does in Stories 2. The next area of the Gunlance I want to talk about is the Wyrmstake. This feature is near perfect as is in Rise, since you have an abundance of fast ways to quickly embed it into the monster, and it's a good damage option. The only improvements I would make to the Wyrmstake is to give it a part breaker bonus, and make it so that the damage of the Wyrmstake scales with attack like it did in Iceborne. I don't know if the Wyrmstake already has a part breaker bonus, but if it does then it could be stronger. I think the severing damage is good for the Wyrmstake, but it would be nice if the Wyrmstake packed more punch in the part breaker department. But both of those aspects are relatively minor changes, and I'm here to spout out my random ideas that completely change the weapon, and make all the Gunlance mains hate me. The two major ideas I have for the Wyrmstake is to add a piercing Wyrmstake and universal Wyrmstakes. The piercing Wyrmstake would really bring the gun out of Gunlance by giving it a long-range projectile. The way I imagine it would work is that when the Gunlance fires the Wyrmstake, instead of embedding itself in the monster, the Wyrmstake fires out of the Gunlance like piercing ammo, and then explodes. It could also work by launching the body of the Wyrmstake and dropping the 3 pins in the monster, and having those explode. Heavy Bowgun already stole Wyvern's fire, so it's only fair that Gunlance steal Wyvern Snipe. The next improvement to Gunlance I mentioned is universal Wyrmstakes, which just means that Gunlance should have a way to switch out the Wyrmstake types in Rise, like being able to use a normal Wyrmstake on wide shelling Gunlances, or using the stun Wyrmstake on long shelling. That leads into another improvement that I would make to the Gunlance in general, but Gunlance needs a customization menu where you can change the shelling type and the Wyrmstake type in the same way that Heavy Bowgun have the customized Bowgun menu. Currently Rise has that with the Rampage Gunlance, and Iceborne has it with the Sophijiva Gunlance. However, this should be an option for every Gunlance, and not just the special ones. This is probably the only change that Gunlance mains would agree with me. The only other addition I would make to the Wyrmstake is to add the Wyrmstake Blast. I can never remember the name of this, but it's the special Wyrmstake that gets loaded with slinger ammo. This seems like it would be done as a switch skill replacing the regular Wyrmstake. However, I think it would fit best as part of the customization I think the Gunlance needs. The last area of the Gunlance I wanted to talk about is the Wyvern's Fire move. The main issue I have with this move is that it seems to have lost its weight and uniqueness. In older games, not only was Wyvern's Fire a unique move, but it had a strong weight behind it that always felt like it sent the monster flying every time you did it. However, now that Wyvern's Fire is an ammo type, it doesn't have the same uniqueness it had before. And I'm not complaining that Heavy Bowgun has that move, I really don't mind, but what bothers me is that Heavy Bowgun's Wyvern's Fire is just better in every way to Gunlance, especially in Rise. It feels like they gave Great Sword's True Charge slash to Charged Blade, and then made it even more powerful. The solution to this problem isn't to just remove Wyvern's Fire from Heavy Bowgun, but to make the Wyvern's Fire that Gunlance has more powerful. This isn't a situation where I think they need something to supplement it to do more damage. I think Wyvern's Fire just needs to do more damage, and have that weight that it used to have. On top of that, I think another way to make Wyvern's Fire better is to give a shelling damage boost while it's cooling down, since the barrel is overheated, and in Rise and Generations Ultimate the skills that improve shelling overheat the barrel. The last thing I want to mention for Wyvern's Fire isn't an improvement I have, but it's more of a prediction for Sunbreak, but I think it's safe to say we will get new switch skills in Sunbreak. So I think one of the new switch skills Gunlance will get is Dragon's Blast as a replacement to Wyvern's Fire, with its attributes being that it does more damage, and has a longer cooldown. That's it for all the improvements I would make for Gunlance. I know I mentioned a lot of ideas that are impractical, or would cause more problems than solve, but if there is any features that definitely need to be added, it is to give Gunlance customizable options to change between the 3 shelling types and the 3 Wyrmstake types. Give Gunlance something to supplement its damage output. Make Wyvern's fire more powerful. Adding those features will definitely improve what Gunlance can do, in addition to adding a lot of quality of life changes that Gunlance needs. That's all I have for today, so if you enjoyed this video then please consider supporting my channel. I'm finally going to make myself finish the script for my Relic Record Analysis Part 2 video, and that is going to feature a lot of monster speculation, as well as breaking down the messages in the game. Anyways, thanks again for watching my video and I'll see you soon.